thank you, Len. And first of all, I just want to say how much I want to congratulate you all for joining this evening. The world is spinning at a really rapid rate at the moment, and what is happening is that all those people who are in some way connected are literally flocking together. And some of the synchronicities that I'm experiencing at the moment in my own life are, the best I can say, is ridiculous. And so the very fact that you're here on this call tells me that you're part of our family. So welcome home. It's lovely to meet you all again. So I started off life as a regular type of guy, playing rugby, teaching chemistry, drinking beer, and being a school teacher. And I've had a very slow, gradual awakening that's taken place over 30 years. And one of the most wonderful things that happened to me was when I became the principal of my school, that the so-called indigo children who were in the school started confiding in me and telling me their stories, telling me what it was that they knew that most people were not aware of at all. And I'm talking about things like very lucid precognitive dreams, where they would have this very, very clear dream with all the emotions associated with that dream, and then that event would happen either in their own personal lives or in the world at large. And what do you do with that? You're a young teenager and you've just experienced something that most people couldn't begin to experience or understand. What was I supposed to do? I mean, it's neat on one hand, and on the other hand, it's a bit scary. Seeing auras around people, certainly many empathic children knowing whether their teachers cared or not, and if the teachers didn't care, they didn't care, so they didn't do any work for them. And so I slowly but surely gathered this incredible insight about these gifted children who remain connected to spirit when they came into the world. And so they have this incredible awareness and wisdom, which is not being supported in the world. And so I made this crazy decision and left my job. Rather like Len, I left a very great school in a strong position because I knew that the current school system was not serving the needs of these children. So my intention was to set up alternative schools. Spirit had other ideas, and it's taken me on this 5-year journey. Interesting that Steve said 5 years ago, because it's 5 years ago for me too, that I left my job and went to nothing and waited to see what was going to happen. And what happened was not expected at all. And that was I started working with people who were dying of terminal cancer, and had the incredible privilege of being alongside people as they made their transition to the next world. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I do now, and really clearly understand that this is part of my learning process, was how to help people heal their soul, even if they couldn't heal their physical body, so their soul could move on to the next life in a healed state and be transformed and transcend through the transition. And then I had this remarkable experience, which is almost unique in the world. There aren't many of us that have had this experience. But I met up, again synchronistically, with a fully functioning medieval alchemist in the world today. And many of you will have heard the word alchemy, and some of you will have an idea of what it means metaphorically in terms of the transformation of the human soul. But I need to tell you that the alchemical process of working with boiling metals and minerals in a 2000 degree C furnace is a real situation that takes place and did take place historically. And it's important to understand this piece of my background, because we are going to be using the alchemical transformation in today and in the series. And so the reason the alchemists worked with the mineral kingdom was the fact that most people don't even think that the mineral kingdom has a consciousness. So if you're the alchemist and you're working with the most basic substance, if you were an Egyptian alchemist, you would have been working with the black soil of the river Nile. And if you could take this black substance and through a series of processes convert it into absolutely pure, pristine gold, then clearly you have been in a co-creative process of the greatest magnitude possible. And I certainly recall and remember when I was standing at the furnace, some very, very momentous moments of co-creativity. One simple one would be that suddenly this pot of boiling metals and minerals suddenly giving off this incredibly beautiful smell, a sort of a hot, warm caramel, beautiful, sweet smell. And you think, well, as a former chemist, you think, how could that possibly happen? Where is that coming from? And so it goes on, and you go through these processes, and you're blown away by what happens in each of the subsequent stages until you create this ingot of metal which contains not just gold but all of the alloys of the 7 metals in the transformation process, which eventually will transmute and transform into gold. And so what this experience gave me was an absolute first-hand, concrete understanding of how the alchemical transformation process takes place for any substance, whether it be a mineral, a metal, a tree, a plant, a person. The alchemical process works for absolutely anything that has a consciousness. And the alchemist works with the Holy Spirit and whatever that material is for that transformation. Now, I'm delighted to say that as I have become more experienced in the alchemical process and in working with people with terminal illness, what has happened is that those people with terminal illness have actually been recovering. Because once you get down to the real depths of the core of the issue, then real healing on the physical body can take place. And that's what Len was talking about when he said some of the miraculous healings that he had experienced and been part of with his Healing with Love process. And so I am so privileged to be working alongside Len and Steve and Swami, because I know these are men of the highest integrity, of the highest humility, and yet they have all of the necessary ingredients in their understanding and expertise to support you on your own journey. And whether you are someone who is suffering and wishing to heal, whether you are someone who is just awakening for the first time, whether you are someone who is already on their awakening path, I can assure you that you will receive this evening and over the next 7 weeks enormous benefit. And you will begin to see this wonderful, wonderful landscape of opportunity begin to open up for you when you understand and can work your way through some of the issues that are residual, and they are residual in our system. We've actually already done most of the hard work, and now we just need to understand how to clear out the remaining dross, clear that out, move into our hearts, and then really begin to enjoy the co-creation process. So now what we want to do is to just talk a little bit about some of the issues that are really, really important at this time. And I'm going to ask Steve to come back and talk a little bit about spontaneous evolution and what is happening in the world today, and what his and Bruce Lipton's conclusions were around the state of our planet and what is really significant about spontaneous evolution. So, Steve, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And by the way, I didn't realize that you were working physically in alchemy. And of course, what I'm doing along with the Swami, we call it all comical healing. And what we're dealing with is the Holy Spirit. So you'll get more of that later. As far as spontaneous evolution and the world that we see right now, these are obviously times of great change and transformation. And if we look at the current crises, they seem overwhelming. We have a perfect storm of crises. We can see that there's ecological crisis, there's economic crisis, there's political crisis, personal crisis, transformational crisis, spiritual crisis, and all of these are kind of winding into one thing. And if we look at the markers, they don't look that good. We've got the planet heating up. We've got rainforests coming down. We've got a overpopulation, et cetera, et cetera. And, a lot of people are looking at these as being, some are calling them the end times. We have of course, the rapture people who imagine that they're going to be swept up by Jesus and company and leave their clothes down here for the rest of us in this rapture. We have scientists who are talking about these times being the sixth great extinction. The other five extinctions were all really because of objects from outer space. But I think if this extinction, as this one moves forward, it really deals with objects from inner space, from our consciousness, from, we're kind of like the sorcerer's apprentice. We have these amazing technological tools. We, as a species, human beings, have these amazing technological tools, and we seem to not have the spiritual wisdom as yet to be able to manage the things that unfold. So there's a lot of feeling that these are really that these times are pregnant with change. We, of course, have the 2012 people who are looking at 2012 as some watershed. And I just want to let you know that the Swami is writing a new book. It's called 2012, The Secrets Revealed, and it'll be out in 2013. So, I want to make sure we get it right. So in looking at all of this, there are people who are using the term apocalypse. These are apocalyptic times. Well, if we look at the original meaning of the word apocalypse, it meant the lifting of the veils. And as we can see, the veils are being lifted on many, many things right now. We see that, the WikiLeaks, not to be confused with mainstream media, which the Swami calls WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has released a lot of these stories about some of the things our government would prefer to have hidden, and we can expect more and more of these toxins coming to the surface. But the other part of the lifting of the veils is that the veils are being lifted on ancient spiritual practices that have been kept in protective custody for many, many years. Peter talking about this alchemical process that, many of us have imagined as just kind of a mythological story like dragons. And yet, these very, very valuable and secret teachings are being liberated. We've got various Qigong and shamanistic practices. We have the Kabbalah, etc., etc. So we are now having access to these tools that we need for transformation. And yet it would seem that what is called for is a miracle. So we want to ask, well, is there a template for miracles? And it turns out that there is. The template for miracles we're going to call spontaneous remission. Now, perhaps people who are listening in on this call, perhaps you know somebody, or perhaps you are somebody who experienced an anomalous healing. You were diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. You were sent home. There's nothing more that medical science can do for you. And then miraculously, you recover. And this happens. There are many cases of these things. And, someone might imagine that this is simply some divine intervention, some mysterious grace that takes place. But it turns out that there may be something more to it. Dr. Louis Mel Madrona, who's an MD who has worked with Andrew Weil, wrote a book called Coyote Medicine. And in this book, Coyote Medicine, Dr. Madrona interviewed many, many people who have had these spontaneous remission experiences, the spontaneous release of their illness. And what he found is that one thing that these people had in common, he called it, they had a change of story. They had a change of story.